The acquisitions of ZeniMax, Bethesda, and Activision Blizzard by Xbox can only be described in one way: an ongoing disaster. Disappointing launches, high-numbered layoffs, and now studios being closed after releasing big hits like Hi-Fi Rush, or games that clearly were not even ready to launch like Redfall. In case you missed it, Xbox is shutting down 4 Bethesda studios: Arcane Austin, Tango Gameworks, AlphaDog, and Roundhouse. And in a world that feels upside down to those who cheered for these acquisitions, but it's hauntingly predictable for those who knew we would end up here, many are now asking, will it just get worse? Given the road that got us here, it's unlikely to get any better. And the losses are primarily felt by everyone other than those who benefited by these market-destructive acquisitions. Devs are losing their jobs, studios are closing, future projects and games have been Thanos snapped out of existence, and the consumer is left wondering, how did any of this help me? A company that promised a deal like this would benefit the players and the studios. A company that said this was in the interest of bringing more games to more people. And all we have now are less studios, less talent in the industry, less games, and more broken promises from a brand whose identity practically centers around the idea of promising one thing and delivering something completely different. Now, every weekday here on Reforge Gaming, I tell you what I think about a gaming topic, and then we go to a live stream where you can tell me what you think. So, if you want more content like this, hit like and subscribe. And in this video, I'm going to walk through the ZeniMax Bethesda acquisition, the Activision Blizzard deal and the role it's currently playing in all of this, the recent layoffs and studio closures, and lastly, I will give you my thoughts on all of this. The ZeniMax Bethesda purchase by Microsoft was one that actually surprised many, particularly because it seemed that another Bethesda game was going to be headed to PlayStation as an exclusive. In September of 2020, Game Informer reported that, quote, Starfield was reportedly in talks to be a timed PS5 exclusive before Microsoft acquisition. And the first thing worthy of note here is the timing. From the article, the latest report about one of the alternate timelines for Starfield comes from esteemed journalist and industry insider Imran Khan. According to a recent Twitter post from Khan, quote, the timing on this announcement is absolutely fascinating. The week after Sony solidifies their existing exclusivity with some Bethesda games, but the day before, Xbox opens up pre-orders. Now, if you don't remember, both Deathloop and Ghostwire Tokyo had been secured as timed exclusives for PlayStation around this time, and it seems that Starfield was headed in a similar direction. More from the article. Khan followed up his initial tweet saying that Sony was reportedly looking into a special deal with Bethesda's sci-fi new IP. Sony had been negotiating timed exclusivity on Starfield as recently as a few months ago, he said. Going to guess, either those talks are done or the price suddenly went way up. Now, anytime I would reference or talk about this, it was dismissed as not true or just pure rumor. But thanks to the FTC trial, it is now a matter of public record to not just be something that was taking place, but it was one of the primary motivations for the ZeniMax Bethesda acquisition. In June of 2023, The Verge published the following article: Microsoft acquired Bethesda after hearing Starfield would be exclusive to PlayStation. And here's Phil Spencer's quote from the report. When we acquired ZeniMax, one of the impetus for that is that Sony had done a deal for Deathloop and Ghostwire to pay Bethesda to not ship those games on Xbox, said Spencer. So the discussion about Starfield, when we heard that Starfield was potentially also going to end up skipping Xbox, we can't be in a position as a third-place console where we fall further behind on our content ownership, so we've had to secure content to remain viable in the business. All of this lands a tad ironic, with rumors now swirling that Starfield will eventually make its way to PS5, and in the wake of the acquisition, game launches were not exactly consistent in the realm of quality. Hi-Fi Rush launched as a shadow drop during a developer direct, and it was described with glowing praise from Aaron Greenberg. In a tweet that's aging about as well as this acquisition, Greenberg said the following: Hi-Fi Rush was a breakout hit for us and our players in all key measurements and expectations. We couldn't be happier with what the team at Tango Gameworks delivered with this surprise release. Now, at the time, there was commentary circulating from Jeff Grubb about hearing that Hi-Fi Rush had missed sales targets. Now, I'm not sure why you would have sales targets for a shadow drop game on Game Pass, especially when, according to an email exchange from the FTC trial that we got to see, Phil Spencer admitted to not being able to measure the value of games that hit Game Pass. Here is a quote from a Polygon article. It's some combination of attract and retain to our service. Different games perform differently. Some are very high on play and therefore a higher impact on retention. Others are a good top of funnel for attract but don't get much play. You need both. I'd be lying to you if I told you we had the Excel sheet of the value of a game completely figured out. We are working with the Microsoft chief economists on the value of content, and they have a model that we've been working with, but it's not complete and likely never will be. At some point, you're asking, why do people like X? And that's a hard question to answer. It's going to be a very organic process for us. Well, based on the recent developments with layoffs and studio closures, I think Xbox and Microsoft have figured it out. But the ZeniMax Bethesda acquisition was just the beginning. Virtually everyone saw the Xbox Activision deal as the beginning of a big change. Some saw it as Xbox's pathway to competing. Cries of "let them compete" were shouted in support of this unprecedented acquisition. Others saw this deal as a change in a completely different way, which is why I was strongly against it and spent much of 2023 covering the regulators and the trials from a very factual place, but I also made sure my opinions were known. I thought this was a terrible idea, which makes the recent news a pretty good amount of insult to injury. Many of us predicted the outcomes we are now seeing from Xbox and Microsoft. But the role that Activision Blizzard is playing can be seen in a variety of ways. First, thanks for a quote from GameSpot, we can see that Phil Spencer told Kinda Funny that, quote, Activision Blizzard King is not our strategy, but it is an accelerant to our strategy, Spencer said. Which many took to mean, well, that just means more games to Game Pass, right? That's their strategy. But a lot of us saw it differently. I continue to say that Microsoft was who everybody should be concerned about. Everybody was focused on Xbox, and I said that that was a mistake because Microsoft was going to treat this acquisition like a software company, and they would focus more on publishing. And Satya Nadella removed all doubt when he said this in an interview on Bloomberg Live.
We've been at gaming, we love gaming. In fact, Flight Simulator was created before even Windows. But we were number 3, number 4, and with now Activision, I think we have a chance of being a good publisher, quite frankly, on Sony and Nintendo and PCs and Xbox.
And this was very similar to something that Satya said on an earnings call with shareholders when he was asked about the future of Xbox. IGN has the quote. Nadella's comments echo those he made last month when he similarly said Microsoft's plans to release games across all platforms. Quote, we think that now we have the ability to do what we always set out to do, which is build great games and deliver them to folks across all platforms, which is Xbox and consoles, the PCs, and now even including mobile gaming and cloud gaming, he said at the time. So it's clear, the groundwork has been laid. They now own a massive amount of property and they can lean into publishing. And with that stage set, its runways are lit up for layoffs and studio closures. Microsoft wasted no time kicking off the layoffs of 2024 when they let 1,900 people go in January, primarily targeting Activision Blizzard. This was quickly dismissed and hand-waved by those wanting to minimize the obvious damage from Xbox's acquisition strategy. We were told that this was something that the whole industry was doing and that Activision would have done their own layoffs regardless of the merger. This obviously ignores the fact that Xbox had a bunch of layoffs in the previous year, and this new round in 2024 was undeniably a direct result of the large-scale acquisition of Activision Blizzard King. And as I said, the stage was set for Microsoft's strategy to feel the acceleration that Phil Spencer talked about. And look no further than Matt Booty's email about the recent closures of Arcane Austin, Tango Gameworks, AlphaDog, and Roundhouse. Pulling from IGN, the email opens with the framework that I believe is somewhat foreboding for all studios under Activision Blizzard. He says the following. Today I'm sharing changes we are making to our Bethesda and ZeniMax teams. These changes are grounded in prioritizing high-impact titles and further investing in Bethesda's portfolio of blockbuster games and beloved worlds which you have nurtured over many decades. Now, the reason I tie this to Activision Blizzard is twofold. First, both Phil and Satya made it clear that the ABK acquisition would help them do what they truly wanted to do. And that path and strategy only works if you cut production costs and you move toward ROI. What better way to do that than target your smaller studios? But I also tie this to Activision because they are now facing the same analysis. Matt Booty's email makes it clear they are targeting, quote, high-impact titles and blockbuster games. So it wouldn't be surprising at all if we see a similar studio closure pass for all the devs under Activision Blizzard King. And the most damning but also confusing part about this is seeing Arcane Austin and Tango Gameworks closed, but for very different reasons. Tango Gameworks launched the most well-received game of 2023 and received high praise from Aaron Greenberg, as we've already cited, but also because we literally have headlines like this VGC article. Microsoft is not planning to shut Redfall studio Arcane Austin. Now, following the turbulent and awful launch of Redfall, Phil Spencer came to the team's defense. Pulling from the VGC article, they were quoting the Kinda Funny interview where Phil Spencer said, "We left them to work on the game. They're a very talented team. I love that team, and I still do, and I will totally bet on them to do another great game." But when Matt Booty and Jamie Letter sit down, I think we can engage earlier with our different studios. See, this is both ownership of how Xbox failed to properly handle the team as well as Redfall, but also it expresses confidence in whatever Arcane Austin does next. And now they're left with trying to figure out how to credit those who paid for Redfall Bite Back Edition. They're trying to give people their money back, which is a whole nother issue. Which I'm sure that sits rather sour with the Arcane team, as they didn't even want to make or ship Redfall to begin with. ZeniMax leadership and Xbox should be completely and totally embarrassed for what they have done to a beloved studio that brought us games like Dishonored and Prey. But when we look to Tango Gameworks, it becomes even more confusing and frustrating. Hi-Fi Rush was the highest-rated Xbox first-party game last year. It won a Game Award for Best Audio Design and recently has seen great scores and reception when it came to PlayStation. It's hard not to look at Xbox with a skeptical eye, given that Hi-Fi Rush was recently rated for the Nintendo Switch. A great way to avoid having to pay the devs any sort of royalties or bonuses in relation to sales while retaining the IP and all of the profit that it generates. I've theorized many times that Hi-Fi Rush would do very well on Nintendo, and with the Nintendo Switch 2 out on the horizon, it could have an amazing second wind. All while the great studio remains shuttered. So if you're feeling angry about this, the feeling is certainly mutual. My thoughts on this hit alongside a cascade of emotion. Part of me wants to be incredibly scathing and just shout, "I told you so." Well, why? Well, because many of us spent the better part of 2023 saying that this sort of thing would happen. All the concerns that we had about studio closures, loss of talent, loss of future games, all so that you could take games already coming to the market and put them on Game Pass. I hope those who supported the deal are starting to see how much we traded and how much we have such little to show for it. Maybe you can take some consolidation in knowing that executives received massive bonuses and many have ridden off into the sunset with golden retirement parachutes. I hope that feels good. And I can't help but see a correlation. Those who are shocked and surprised by this also happen to be the same people who use their platforms to cheer for it. You wanted these acquisitions, and you got them. And even after these deals closed, many of you wanted more, treating publishers and developers like a grocery shopping list. Well, maybe this can be a wake-up call. I said many times, more times than I can count, that the gaming public should stop looking at Xbox and start looking at Microsoft. They are corporate raiders, and they're proving that to the watching world. But they're also proving it to every studio under their ownership. This isn't just a dark day for the studios that closed or the employees who lost their jobs. Every developer under Microsoft ownership now lives under this shadow. This is the bleak future that many of us were scared of. So I hope it was worth it. I hope getting more games on Game Pass was worth everything that we've lost and stand to lose in the future. But those are just my thoughts. Now it's time to hear your thoughts. And you can do that in a comment below, or you can come into the live stream. We have a card at the end of the video. We have a redirect as well as a pinned comment at the top of the comments below. And as always, please like, share, and subscribe.